Right, now we're moving to, so local board input. We do have Waitemata Local Board, but they will be speaking at item 10 on the Central Library indicative business case. Thank you. Item 8, now we've got the Auckland Unitary Plan consideration of private plan change request Riverhead South. We'll have Peter and Warren. We have Megan and John here as well, able to answer questions. Right. Thank you. Just go to the presentation, then the Mayor would like to speak, and then we'll go to questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the report is to decide how to process this private plan change to the Auckland Unitary Plan from the Riverhead landowner group in respect of land at Riverhead. So we've identified on the screen in front of you the land in red, and it immediately joins the current single house zoning in Riverhead. And you can see its context there. The yellow is the future urban zone, the brown is the countryside living zone, and the other colour outside of that, the grey colour, is the rural environment, is the rural zone. So the proposal is to rezone 80.5 hectares from future urban to a series of residential zones, including mixed housing urban and terrace house and apartment building zone, and with a number of commercial locations inside of that as well. So the decision you have to make today is a decision under the Resource Management Act, in particular Clause 25 of the Resource Management Act. So that specifies the number of, or the options that you have in front of you. So one option is to adopt the request as if it was a council plan change. You can accept the private plan change for processing, or you can reject the private plan change request in whole or in part, or you can deal with the application as if it was a resource consent. So we'll just go through that, and at the moment we're required to make a very coarse assessment of the proposal that's in front of us. So if we can move to the second slide. Right, that's it. Yeah, so this is just outlining the zoning that is proposed. So you can see the orange area there. The most orange of the orange areas is the terraced house and apartment building zone. The pink is the business zone, and the remainder is the brown colour is the mixed housing urban zone. So that's just to give you the context. Of course, that is more intensive than the current zoning in Riverhead, which is single house. So just move on. So the assessment that we require to make includes, first of all, should we reject, I think the key point is, are there grounds for rejecting this private plan change? And when we work through those, the legislation sets out some very clear considerations. So the first one is the request frivolous or vexatious? The applicants have provided an extensive range of reports and expert consideration as to why this proposal makes sense, and so on that basis we can't say that it is frivolous or vexatious. It follows the council has identified this land for future urban development. It's in the future urban zone, and in the future urban land supply strategy we've identified it for development in 2028 to 2032. So it's ahead of time, but the council has always identified this land for urban development. So in that sense, we can't say it's frivolous or vexatious. The next test is, has the substance of the request been considered and given effect to, rejected by the council in the last 2 years? And the answer is no, it's not been considered in the last 2 years, and so on. So the key test we have is the request in accordance with sound resource management practice. And one of the things that we have to consider is the land, part of the land, it's 80.5 hectares, and about an 8 hectare area. Where's the pointer on this thing? Oh, right. So that area up the top there, that 8 hectares, which was actually included in the, sorry, that 8 hectare area there, you will see what we're showing here is the floodplain. So that's a floodplain over that blue is the floodplain, blue is the floodplain there. That was included through by the independent hearing panel that provided, that created the Auckland Unitary Plan. So that was, a submitter asked for that to be added, and it was added through that IHP process. But what the Healthy Waters team is saying, that area is in the floodplain, and so there are some issues, and with that, and they would rather have that turned into some sort of communal flood protection sort of system. However, the applicant acknowledges that that area is subject to flooding and has provisions in the plan that says, okay, we can deal with that, we can work our way around that, and certainly a resource consent proposal is, a resource consent is required for subdivision of that land, and that would be, how you deal with the flooding would be a consideration at the time of subdivision and development. And there are also our standard council rules in Chapter E of the Unitary Plan which deal with flooding and so on. So there is an issue with flooding. It can be dealt with at this point in time, but that flooding issue is sitting there. So that's something that needs to be considered when we consider, is this sound resource management practice? Sorry, the other way. The next thing, in terms of sound resource management practice, and also in terms of the other criteria, which is, would the request or part of the request make the policy statement or plan inconsistent with Part 5, which are really the higher level documents, your national policy statements, your regional policy statement, so on. And so what we're showing here is the transport issues. So there are potentially some transport issues here. The applicant believes that they have been able to address that, and what we're showing here on the map is the wider supporting growth network. So our Riverhead, where's our pointer? You can see our Riverhead area there and there, and there are some roads and so on. This is the long-term proposal for roading to serve all the future urban areas around Kumeu, Whenuapai and Riverhead. And this is just to give you the context. So what we can see is that the applicant is saying, Riverhead is here. What we need to have for us to get people into Auckland and so on is we need to come down here onto State Highway 16. And so the issue is that Waka Kotahi or NZTA is going to improve the State Highway 16 in the vicinity. And so they have a proposal, they have funded and committed $137 million to upgrade State Highway 16. So that is, they've partially starting it now, it's funded and committed, so they're doing the work, and yeah, so that's going to be completed in 2025. So that's funded and committed, and they've lodged their notice of requirement to enable that work to happen with the council already, and it's being processed currently. So it's going to happen. Yeah. So I just wanted to, so that will involve 4-laning of State Highway 16 from the end of the current northwestern motorway through to the Taupaki roundabout. It'll involve a new roundabout at the Coatesville Riverhead Highway intersection, which is where the applicant says most of their traffic will come out to onto State Highway 16. So, and then there'll be safety barriers, a 3-metre shared path all that way along that route, all the way to Kumeu, and so, and then obviously the next part of the process is safety improvements out to Waimaoku. So that's in train. The question, so the applicant is saying that all of those things, the State Highway 16 issue is going to be addressed by that particular NZTA proposal. And what they're proposing themselves is a series of improvements to the Coatesville Riverhead Highway where it fronts their property. and also as you drive out towards on the Riverhead Road towards Kumu-Hupai, there'll be a number of intersection improvements and so on the applicant is providing. So what they're saying is that there will be some, the traffic issues are going to be resolved by what Wakakatahi doing on State Highway 16 and what they're doing themselves in relation to the property that fronts their site, the roading network that fronts their site, including walking and cycling provision. There is a question though about how much of the state highway, the Coatesville Riverhead Highway that is not improved where it doesn't front their property, and so the link south towards State Highway 16 from their property, there is an issue about what is required there to improve that road, in particular about walking and cycling facilities along that road. So they're not proposing anything there, and so there is a question mark about that, and I guess what we're saying, and what I'm saying in the report here is that that's something that can be dealt with when we go through if we go through and get to a stage of a formal private plan change being notified, then that's something that can be addressed there. And one other issue, I suppose, is, this is just to outline what those traffic improvements are on State Highway 16. You can see the 4-laning, the median barriers, and the 3-metre shared path and so on. So those are the key elements there. So there is, as I said, there's an issue about whether that's sound resource management practice where you think there is some gap in what might happen with the roading network. And the other thing that is, of course, important is that what they're proposing in terms of development intensity is much more intensive than the current zoning around Riverhead, which is single house, and what we're proposing here is mixed housing urban. It also proposes the medium density residential standards, which the council has chosen to say it doesn't have to do it under the legislation, and it's chosen to have Riverhead as one of those 23 areas where we're saying we don't need to have MDRS. So that tests us again, we have to test that against the high level documents, and it meets some, but there are some elements of our regional policy statement and also the NPSUD. It certainly meets some of them, but there are some elements that it may not. So then we can, but in summary, I guess we're saying that there are some elements that you could use to say that it could be rejected, but on balance what we're saying is that this should, at the very coarse merits assessment level, this should go forward and be dealt with as a notified plan change, and that those issues that have been raised could be dealt with through the hearing and submission process as part of that, the normal plan change process. There is also the option that if those issues are not enough to reject the plan change at this stage, it's open to the council to obviously lodge a submission as well if it was publicly notified and go through that process. So the recommendation in the report is to accept the private plan change for processing based on the very coarse merits assessment that we must make under clause 25 of the first schedule of the legislation. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you very much, Peter. Right, we're going to go to a resolution. The Mayor is going to move and I'll second, and then we'll go to questions. So if we just want to put the resolution on. So the Mayor would like to speak to this and we'll go to questions after that.
Can we send that around, please? Because it's a
we can
lot
send
to
it
read
around.
on a screen.
There you go, Mayor.
Yeah, I'm proposing we reject this one for the reasons set out in the resolution. The key concerns being that we have flooding on part of this land, and we've just had recent lessons about flooding that we turned out not to be taken as seriously as we should, and we just heard the previous speakers about that. It's out of sequence as a development goes. It doesn't allow us to plan properly for infrastructure. It is expected to be done sometime in the future, but right now I don't know the rush because there is significant investment in public transport required, there, which is not part of our plan. We've heard there's a Waka Kotahi funded upgrade which partially solves some of those issues, but right at the moment there is some debate as to whether or not we don't rejig the Waka Kotahi funded thing to spend better elsewhere. The timing's basically wrong. There's no public transport plans yet committed to in this area. We're trying to resolve this, but that'll take time. And as you notice, one of those ones that's rejoining Riverhead, which is one of the excluded settlements under Plan Change 78. Later in the day, we're going to discuss our future development program, so I just think the timing's wrong for this.
Thank you. So just put that up and we'll send that around for people to read. And in the meantime, we have a number of questions. So Councillor Simpson, Deputy Mayor, first.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Look, I suppose I want to ask some questions that will give me the answers whether to accept this one or not. So you've said approximately 8 out of the 80 hectares is floodplain, all right? So I want to know, if it is developed, can that be mitigated through good stormwater design? Or are you saying, and I know man versus nature and all that kind of stuff, but you know, there are times that you can and things that you can do and things that you can't. How confident are you that that part could be mitigated through good stormwater design? Or are you saying, well, no, not really?
The advice from our Healthy Waters team is that it should be basically turned into that part of the site should have a detention pond and that sort of thing on it, and be a community asset rather than developed. So that they don't want that part of the site to be developed essentially.
Okay, got that. My second one is, sorry, Chair, I've got one on transport and then one on process, right? So the second one now, so on the transport, how serious, in your opinion, are the transport issues, and how confident are you that we respond to those either through Waka Kotahi on roading improvements or PT or cycling? Do you think we've got the transports? Are you confident that the transport solutions are there to support this development?
I think what we're recommending is that those things are, at our very highest level, they are covered, but what we're saying is, I suppose, is that that can be dealt with through the normal hearing or submission and hearing process. So I would expect, for example, that Auckland Transport, that Waka Kotahi, and that any affected residents would put in a submission. And if there are concerns about that, then that would be dealt with through the process. So we're not saying that at the moment that we're 100% satisfied. What we're saying is, at the very course level assessment, which the courts have said we can only make that, we can't get into great detail. That's the issue here, is plan changes, you have a two-stage process. One, you've got to check it. Is it crazy? Is it so bad that it shouldn't go ahead and be considered in the normal way that a plan change is considered? So we're at that level. At that level, we're saying it seems to us that there are some concerns about, and particularly the Coatesville Riverhead Highway, because State Highway 16 looks like it's going to be funded, and that funding in the material indicates that there will be spare capacity. It's going to address some safety issues, and it's going to address capacity issues for a number of years, into the 2030s at least, that upgrade will happen. The bit that is of concern, I suppose, is the bit along the Coatesville Riverhead Highway where we all want alternative modes, walking and cycling. What the applicants are proposing is to include that and upgrade the intersections along the Coatesville Riverhead Highway towards State Highway 16, but they're not going to provide a cycle or a walking or cycling path all the way along. So it just depends on how good you think that is, and that's something we would deal with probably if the plan change was notified. But it is a concern that it's not being proposed at the moment.
Okay, so what you're saying here, if we accept it and it goes to a hearing, right, which is the process that traditionally we do use, have we still got the ability to stop the development through that process?
As I said, one issue, we expect that people like Wakakotahi and AT would make a submission, and it's possible that the council could also make a submission. That's not closed off to you, that you could make a submission to make sure that those things were actually on the table to be considered in more detail through the hearing and submission and hearing process. So if the council lodged a submission saying, hey, we have some concerns about this and we can elaborate what those concerns are, then if that went forward as a submission, then any independent commissioners who are assessing this plan change and the submissions to it would have to consider that. At that point, you would prepare detailed evidence and what have you about what you think the concerns are and justify those concerns.
Okay, and then finally, once upon a time, we rejected a plan change and it didn't work, right? What is the difference, Megan, or Mrs. Strategy and title, insert title. What is the difference between this and the Ōrākei issue?
Through the chair, thanks. So the main difference here is one where we have identified that if you wanted to, we believe there are some grounds for rejection. In the Ōrākei Point matter a few years ago, we didn't believe there was. Now that's just our advice. As always, this falls to you to make whatever decision you like. So that's the main and significant difference. There was also a bit of a process difference here where we are asking for a clear decision first around whether or not you want to reject it, and should you not, then it's clear what your next option is. So it's really the fact that we do believe there are grounds, but as always, it falls to you to make that decision.
And just finally, are we up for a legal fight if we reject?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Walker.
Sure. So the question I've got is around the floodplain, and my question goes like this: How recently is the modelling that we've done for this floodplain? I'm not absolutely familiar with the topography of the area. Obviously, we've got an area of low-lying land that's within an existing floodplain, but I don't doubt that the modelling, if we do it, will show that the floodplain is likely to enlarge, and I'd like to know what the projections are around that. And this is particularly relevant because I think the overall catchment is in excess of 8,000 hectares, and the flow of water within that catchment will have an impact on this area. So has this area been considered within the larger context? So some questions there to rehash. What's the state of our modelling as it goes to the floodplain? How recent is it, because things have moved on? What's the state of the catchment? How does that impact on this area, in particular because of any instances with further land that may be impacted by a revisit of that floodplain? Thanks.
So the information we base this on is the current information that we have that's contained in the council's GIS database. But I do know that in terms of flooding around Kumu-Huapai and this area, the council is doing some, Healthy Waters Department is doing some remodelings or some new modelling. So that, I understand, is underway, and Nick Vigar and his team are looking at that now. So yes, it's clear that there will be some remodelling, but we can only base our current analysis on the information we have at the moment. We know that it could change, and that work is underway to do that remodelling. That's the best I can offer you.
So the ongoing concern I've got is that, in my opinion, much of the modelling and much of what we base things on is out of date. The climate change stuff was out of date when we initiated it in the Unity Plan. It's based around 2015. That's already superseded. And I'd suggest our flood modelling is out of date. The Rangatapuni flows into the upper Waitemata Harbour, which is incredibly sensitive catchment that was covered off in reports to the Auckland Regional Council back in the 80s. My ongoing concern is that we need to have really up-to-date information, and just relying on the unitary plan is inadequate in my view. So I'd like to know at what point we're going to get that up-to-date information. Because we're making a decision now. By all means, we can consider the unitary plan, but we should also be considering current data if we're aware of it. Thanks.
Just through the chair, I think for the purpose of today's decision, we're clearly not going to have any additional data than what we have now. So it will take some time, but I think that's all I can say for you in terms of your decision today.
So through you, Mr. Chair, my further question is, if it's established that we actually don't have good quality information to base a decision on, are we in a position to defer this until we get that information? Because it wouldn't be too difficult. Thank you.
Through the chair, our advice to you is that for the purpose of this process and where we're up to, there is enough data to be able to make a decision. If you disagree with that, or if you have concerns, then you may want to support the resolution that's in front of you. But otherwise, we believe we can proceed.
So back to my question on the data, I'd like to know what our present state is in terms of the modelling and the data that we're relying on, vis-a-vis the comment that the Chief of Strategy makes, because I may not, as a councillor, be satisfied with the information that we've got. And I want to be able to make that call based on good information. So can I have that? And can we have that?
I think from my perspective that question has been answered, Councillor Walker. We have the data that has to be used, that we have on our floodplains, our mapping, etc. What we have asked straight after the floods was for more information, more data, more information on overland flow paths and where it flooded, where it didn't, and some of those issues are there, but we cannot consider those, and that is not that we aren't able to use that today, and we have to make this decision within a time frame.
Through you, Mr. Chair, frankly, I don't think you're in a position to make that call. I've asked a specific question, which I can repeat, around what the present state of modelling and catchment is for the area.
Councillor,
that question has not been answered.
Stop.
Point of order.
Councillor, what I was saying was the question had been answered. If you want Megan to repeat it, she can, and I'll just get one last time. If you would like to repeat your answer, that would work.
My question was directed to the officers, not to Megan. It's a technical question that goes to catchment modelling.
Councillor, that's inappropriate. Megan is an officer, and they all can decide who answers the question.
So for the purpose of you making your decision, I can provide you a link to the unitary plan and any flooding data there that you can look at now, but between now and your decision on whichever recommendation goes ahead. That's all I can provide you this morning. And if you'd like that, I'm happy to get that to you.
And I will just add that the applicant has provided their own data about flooding as well, and they acknowledge that that part of the site will flood, and that they will have to design and develop around that.
Thank you. Councillor Sayers.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I'll just reserve my right to speak. I'll just ask some questions, because I'm pleased about the recommendation. I'll probably be supporting what's up there in red. I was very worried about the other, having to vote against that, but I can vote for this. So my question, just to cement that line of thinking, in terms of the organisation that's behind, is Fletcher's at the end of the day, isn't it? Is it Fletcher's?
It's a group, combined group, Riverhead landowner group. It includes Fletcher Residential, Neil Group, and Matfin.
Okay, great. Okay, and in terms of the phasing, I think Toe brought it up a little bit of a concern there. Just trying to understand the phase. So, when would this come online? If it went through and got approval and they were able to start building it, Peter, when would it actually be completed?
So there are provisions in here that require the State Highway 16 improvements to be in place before development can be occupied.
Yeah.
So at the moment, the State Highway 16 provisions are 24/25 year is when Wakakotahi want to have it completed.
Okay, thank you for that. And my understanding of those improvements actually along state, not the intersection at Coatesville, but the actual state highway improvements are safety improvements ahead of mainly capacity enhancement. Would that be correct?
They're both. There's the safety improvements, including 4-laning and a wire rope barrier down the middle, and the 3-metre shared path provide both capacity and safety. So there is a large element of improving the capacity of State Highway 16. They recognise that it's an issue at the moment, and so this is the proposal to establish it, but it's also got a very high safety, its rationale is safety as well as capacity. And from what I can gather from the material, it looks like that they expect that the capacity will last up until the 2030s sometime. It's a bit, it depends on what modelling, but also that a lot of the capacity will come out of the larger QMU future urban area, and if that starts developing, then that's when the capacity will be used up more quickly than currently.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for that answer. I'll try and phrase this as a question to you. That's because it's like, you know, there's an old thing with the housing going in before the infrastructure's there. That's probably my concern. So thank you for your answer around that. But there's also a bypass being planned in that area to increase capacity significantly to cope with growth in that area as well. So has that featured at all in our thinking or in the paper? And should it be? No?
Yes, so that was that plan I showed earlier with the yellow areas and the red lines around it, which was the alternative state highway. And again, what Wakakotahi is saying is that will be ultimately required for the growth of all the future urban areas. That's what they would need to service that. But the interim improvements on State Highway 16 are what the applicant is saying can cope with the 15 to 1,800 household units they want to establish in there up until the late 2030s. Okay. And so Wakakotahi have served their notices of requirement on the council to establish that alternative state highway, and that'll go through the normal submission process for notices of requirement. Okay. But that is looking at in the 2030s plus 15 to 20 years away.
Great, thank you for that answer. My final one through you, Chair, might not be for the planning department, it's probably more around in that legal sphere. I'm just wondering about, I'm just trying to clarify, Chair, in terms of if we support this recommendation, I would assume, I guess that's my question, is there a high likelihood that the applicant will take us to court? And I think I heard from Megan that we're prepared to do that and draw a line in the sand somewhere around private plan changes being forced through ahead of overriding our own planning and policy strategies.
Through the chair, yes, we will be challenged in court on the decision, should that be the one you made it. I didn't extend my answer to suggest that that's what you should do, or that we're drawing a line in the sand, but that is that's part of your decision making. But there will be legal challenge to this, yes.
Thank you, Megan. I can perhaps speak more to that as appropriate in the debate, but I think we should.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Darby. Oh, sorry.
Thank you. So, is it primarily two sections that of the tests for a private plan change that we're looking at here? That's sound resource, question of whether it's Sound Resource Management Act, and the other part is consistency with Part 5. That's where we narrow the discussion. Peter, Warren, is that it?
Yeah, yes, Councillor Darby, it's those two areas of the tests, and there are possibly three components to that. One is the transport issue, where there's some doubt about the Coatesville Riviera Highway and so on. There's the flooding issue, again, that provide to the top end of the 8 hectares of the 80 hectares. And then there's potentially the density issue as well, because, so those are, and they both fall within contrary to sound resource management practice and or would make your plan contrary to Part 5.
So if we go to the course assessment that you've undertaken on those two areas, and I can see from reading your report, it's water and transport are the areas that it's narrowed to under Sound Resource Management Act testing. So in your report, you don't appear to conclude that there's, from your course assessment, you say that it may not be, at least under transport, may not be in accordance with sound resource management practice, but you don't conclude that it's not sound. It's a possibility under the course. Does the same apply to water, that it may be, or are you more conclusive in that area?
But partially with the flooding issue, it's again a maybe, but the reality is that we've got 80.5 hectares and a very discrete area, 8 hectares is what is subject to flooding, and the applicant acknowledges that and knows that and says we will try and develop it, we can develop around that. And so while it's there, and also there are some, the provisions in the plan change recognise that subdivision is a restricted discretionary activity, so it requires a resource consent, and how you deal with flooding is a specific matter that has to be addressed. So we're saying while they recognise it's there are mechanisms in the plan change documentation itself and the council's own standard rules about flooding in E36, I think it is, can deal with that. So that's where that's why we're not saying totally that it's contrary, but it's certainly, there's an issue that you've got some land that floods, you want to zone it for a residential purpose, so there may be some issues there. I guess the thing is that we have to make a course level assessment. It's clear from the legislation and on the case law that that's what we have to do. We can't get down into too much detail at this point in time.
So no matter what our view on the law might be, it is the law, and it's written that way, and we've just got to abide by. So just in terms of what's open to the applicant, and maybe this is a legal response, or it could be a planning response. We have the example of the Aurake challenge and the determination of a High Court judge. So what is open to the applicant is that they can go for is it a determination? It's not a full consideration of the plan change. Is it an application for a determination in the High Court, as the party did on the Aurake land?
If you turn this down as the Chief of Strategy has said, then they have a right to appeal to the Environment Court, and I think that it's probably want to exercise that right. But I'm not sure. I mean, our legal counsel might be able to advise us if they could seek some sort of determinative judgment. Is that what you're...
Well, maybe it is good for legal to come up, because I would actually like to know, because, I mean, everything written in this report would come before the court, and the court would then see that experts at the council recommended acceptance and processing. So, Karina, is it JR in the High Court, or is it Environment Court?
Through the chair, if the decision today is to reject the private plan change request under one more ground under clause 25.4, there is a right of appeal by the applicant under clause 27 of Schedule 1, and that's to the Environment Court.
It is the Environment Court, sorry. Okay, so Karina, and the Environment Court would be considering everything that's disclosed to it by the applicant, and council would have to reveal its hand, its position, and that position from our staff is is to accept, that would all be revealed in that determination or that hearing?
Yes, it's very clear from the case law that the council's only opportunity to reject is if one or more ground is available, and that's the only opportunity you have. If there are no grounds, you must not reject and you must accept. If there are grounds available, you must consider, you don't have to reject. The council has the opportunity to either reject or exercise its discretion not to reject and can then accept the plan change.
So from a planning and a legal viewpoint, your expertise applied here says there is no grounds to reject.
Through the chair, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you can only reject if there is one or more ground available. In the report, as I understand it, it says that there is a ground available to you. So you then must make the decision as to whether or not you reject the private plan change or you exercise your discretion not to reject.
Yeah, I'm just trying to unpack the may not be in accordance. That's what I'm trying to unpack. It's not stating that it's not in accordance, it's may not be in accordance.
Through the chair, as I understand it from staff, they're indicating that they have identified a ground, but I guess the tricky thing is you're doing a course merits assessment at this point in time, so it's actually difficult to ascertain whether it meets this ground. The indication from staff is that it may meet this ground of not being in accordance with sound resource management for the reasons they've given.
Okay, I'm having difficulty with that. Sorry, and excuse me, because the words are that it may not be in accordance. It doesn't say it's not being written here that it's not in accordance. So on the transport section, for example, where are the staff saying it's not in accordance? Because, look, the law doesn't talk about may not be in accordance, it just says not in accordance. I need some help unpacking that. So where are the staff saying there is an argument to reject when it's being suggested that it may not be in accordance, it's not absolutely not in accordance? Or am I picking hairs here? Am I playing with semantics?
I think we've identified that, particularly in relation to the Coatesville Riverhead Highway, which I've mentioned before, that they're not proposing to do a significant upgrade other than what's in front of their property. We know that supporting growth is saying, in the fullness of time, we want a full upgrade of the Coatesville Riverhead Highway, and that we want to have walking and cycling provisions and some safety improvements on that road. That's not happening under this plan change. So we're saying that's a potential issue, but the applicants are arguing that that is only required when the full build-out of growth happens, and including the extra 25,000 population at Kumeu-Huapai, identified in the future urban zone. And so they're saying that that's not required now, so our provisions mean that we can go forward and develop our 1,500 and 1,800 houses now. And so we know it's needed in the long term. They're not proposing to do anything about it now. So I guess what we're saying is that may be an issue, but we can't tell until we go through the full assessment, because all we are entitled to do now is that very broad assessment. Their engineering assessment, their integrated traffic assessment and so on is telling us that it's fine. We haven't been able to do our own ITA or full high-level assessment, detailed assessment of that, simply because of the stage we're in that process. So we're saying we think there could be a problem here or an issue here. We're not 100% certain, but it is an issue we're raising in the report. But until we get into that finer level detail, which we're entitled to do at a later stage, we can't say fundamentally that it's, whether it is or isn't.
Okay, and last one, Chair. Karina, the Iraqi decision by the judge there said to err on the side of caution if in doubt. Is that a fair summary of that case? And that's case law, isn't it?
The Environment Court decision in relation to Iraqi Point trustees, and that situation, the council had put forward the ground of sound resource management practice as the basis for rejecting it, and the court did say in that case if the council had doubt as to whether or not a private plan change request was not in accordance with sound resource management practice, that the cautious approach would be to proceed to accept the private plan change and notify it.
Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, forgive me for the lawyerisms, but just on relation to that question, that quote from the judgment, would you consider that binding precedent, or is that more obiter?
Through the chair, that is precedent. That was a finding of the court.
Well, there you go. Okay, so we're called upon to interpret the legal test of sound management practice. Just wondering, in line with that kind of case law themed questioning, in assessing this threshold, do we have any examples of something that has actually failed that test?
A private plan change request, sorry, through the chair.
An example where it's not sound.
Yes, the Mallory Corporation private plan change was a private plan change request to the almost defunct Rodney plan, and in that case, the timing and nature of that particular plan change and what was being sought was found to be not in accordance with sound resource management practice. That was some time ago.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah, it looks fairly obscure, but is there anything analogous in that case to this case? Or forgive me if it's too detailed.
Through the chair, in that particular case, as I recall, there were issues in relation to the timing, and that it was in relation to an almost defunct planning document. I understand it was inconsistent with a structure plan that had been developed by the council, in which case that had been through a recent consultation process. We don't have that same situation here, of course, because we haven't actually done the structure planning for this area. That's correct.
The council hasn't completed its structure planning, but the applicant has provided its own structure plan. The unitary plan allows applicants to come forward with a structure plan. They've provided that structure plan as supporting documentation to the plan change.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you. I have a number of questions. My first one really is curiosity. I wanted to know, are you familiar with the Stonefields one? And was concern raised about flooding with that Stonefields one? And then in the end, they had that communal wetlands. Is there some similarities that can be drawn with this situation?
Through the chair, could you please clarify which private plan change request?
I don't know what private plan change. I'm just talking about, was flooding an issue back then with the Stonefields one? And then they ended up with this communal wetlands, which is what Healthy Waters is suggesting for this situation. So I'm wondering whether flooding was an issue back then. And then if, like that obviously went ahead, doesn't seem to be any flooding because they mitigated it with that wetland, I suppose. This is just all, I'm not an expert, but this is just what I can see. So is that a similar situation here? Flooding is raised as an issue. Healthy Waters said if you make it a communal wetlands, that might mitigate it.
Through the chair, I'm not familiar with that particular private plan change request, so I'm going to give that over to John Duguid to answer.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for legal, I was looking for the planning side.
Thanks, Councillor Bartley. Through the chair, the rezoning of the Stonefields lands, I think it predates Auckland Council, so you're going back to the early 2000s. Whether it was a private plan change, an Auckland City Council plan change, or both, can't actually recall. But absolutely certain that flooding stormwater issues were looked at right from the outset as part of that plan change process, be it a public or a private one. So different context, different time, but it is an example of a development where flooding was looked at carefully when going from a quarry to residential and mixed use. And there are other examples where there have been greenfield developments with fairly significant flooding areas that have been avoided through the development process.
Cool, thank you. And then I just am seeking clarity on point 6. So the advice from officers is that we, bugger, I don't have my glasses, is that the private plan change request is accepted. That's right?
Correct.
That's correct, okay. Because I don't want to be sued. So this is my question to legal. Could we be seen as acting in bad faith if we proceed with this amendment when the officer advice is clearly contrary?
Through the chair, I think there's two parts to that. One, in making your decision under clause 25 of Schedule 1, the council needs to make a decision first on whether it's going to reject a private plan change request. As you may recall from our situation with Auraki, the council made the decision first not to accept the private plan change request, and then it put itself into a position where it had to take one of the other options available to it. Because the staff had put forward a possible ground of rejection, you actually have to consider that first and actually determine, do you want to reject it? And if not, then you default to what has been recommended to you from staff. But because there has been a ground put up for a possible rejection, you need to consider that first. And then if you determine that you don't want to reject it, then you move on to what has been recommended to you by staff.
And is it too early to ask if we could win if this does go to court? And I'm mindful that we're in a public forum. I don't want to spend money on a court case when we're clearly in a financial hole and we know that we could lose. So why would we waste that money to make a point, a very expensive point?
I'm never going to give you odds of whether or not you're going to be successful at court, but I would say that the case law is clear. You can only look to reject a private plan change request if you have one or more ground available to you. So you have a ground available to you, but you don't have to reject. The legislation is very clear that the council may reject, but it's not a must. So it's open to you to either reject it or not.
Okay, thank you. And just one more, please, Chair. Point 5, I've seen that lots of times in these plan change request reports that come to us. Why this time? Are we're taking this course of action where we didn't before? Before we would accept them and then we would oppose with a submission. But this time round, it's like we just want to take on this fight. What's the difference?
So every decision has to be made at the time we are presented with the information. We do have grounds of rejection here, which other times we haven't. We've opposed it based on feelings, and then we've gone through a plan change process. So this time we do have grounds for rejection. The mayor, the local councillor, we've had emails from, we've had feedback from local MPs about development in this area post the floods. There is, as Councillor Walker says, more information that's needed. So this is up to us to make a decision to either reject or not reject, and then make a decision after that if this does not go forward. I guess, do you have anything to say on the making a decision based on Karina?
Through the chair, I'd just like to remind you that you have to consider each private plan change request on its merits. Each one needs to be considered on the information that's put forward to you by a private plan change applicant, and you need to consider it against the relevant provisions under the Act. What you've done previously in relation to another private plan change request is not actually relevant to what you do here. You need to consider each one on its merits.
Councillor Filipaina, you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. One of the parts I have in tēnā koutou to our staff and also to you, Chair. The first question is to you, Chair, and His Worship the Mayor, is if he's there. And in regards to you, the recommendation we see in front of us, is there only one ground of rejection is what your recommendation is based on?
There are other grounds that are mentioned through the report. The Mayor has left, well, he's in the building, but he's on another meeting call at this time, so he can't answer that question. But this is out of line with our council plan and policies, so we can mention those things.
And is that, so I'll just go to Karina, because it's against our policies and practices and what's been mentioned in B, Karina, that is that something that has to be taken in regards to the Resource Management Act and Clause 25(4)(c), which is up there on Schedule 1?
Through the chair, sorry.
For example, sorry, Karina, what I'm suggesting here is that this new recommendation has only got one ground under the RMA, which is it's not in accordance with sound resource management practice. And then they've given the reasons, but those reasons given in B, does that have to be taken into account from a legal perspective?
Through the chair, the staff in the recommendation report to you have identified this as a possible ground of rejection. And as I understand it from the resolution that's been put up, that information has been taken from the report in terms of the reasons in support of the proposed ground of rejection. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
It does a little bit, but look, just to our staff now, just want to confirm that the reasons not to reject based on 25(4) Schedule 1 is that the request is not frivolous, it's not vexatious, it's the substance of the request has been considered. All the A, B, C, D, E, F, they are the reasons that you originally put up to say that from your recommendation, it is better for us to not reject the private plan change. Can I confirm that, please?
I think in terms of those A, B, and C, we're saying correct that they're not grounds to reject. But in terms of item D, we're saying that we've identified that there are some potential grounds, but because you have the opportunity to you say it's a may, you may reject on that basis. We're saying at the moment our advice is that we should carry on and notify this at this point in time. Now that's only because, as I say, because those grounds that we've identified at the very course level, they may exist, but we're not 100% certain as to what the final, I guess, conclusion that you would reach, and we need that further, more detailed assessment to reach that final conclusion. We can only do that by notifying the plan change and having all matters being considered fully.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm glad that you mentioned D, because the hearings process that you've identified in the report is where we would end up putting in evidence to the hearings process and publicly notified that addresses some of the issues that you have in the report. Am I correct in saying that? And also part 2 to that is that it also allows mana whenua iwi to be part of that process as well as the general public?
Yes, the short answer is yes. If it goes forward, then anyone interested can be a party to decision-making process, submission, hearing and decision-making process.
Yeah, thank you. And Chair, I reserve my right to speak. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. To a degree, some of my questions have been answered, but may I acknowledge firstly the frank and careful advice that you're giving us, which I really welcome in this case. And I don't intend to speak later, so I'll just indicate that I'm supportive of the recommendations being put forward by the Mayor and the Chair of the committee. But I just want clarity on one point. We've talked about the case law. I mean, we're a creature of statute. We do what we are required to do. We tick the boxes. But at what point can we, I guess the question in everyone's minds at the moment, is exercise our judgment as governors of this region in a way that we respond to the information we have at hand. Now, you've been at pains to talk that through with us, but what I'm interested to know as somebody who wants to push back at this stage, because we have had floods, we have had cyclones, within case law, what weighting is given, because each application has to be looked at by us individually in terms of a private plan change. But from a legal perspective, what weighting as governors can we actually give to recent events that have had a traumatic impact on our region?
Perhaps I could say, I acknowledge your concern about the flooding and hazards and so on, which have happened, and also in the northwestern area. So there are, I guess, several options open. So you could, we have said there that this could be not sound resource management to continue this, and if you agreed with that, you could reject the plan change. You don't have to, but you could. Or alternatively, you could manifest those concerns that you have through a submission by the council in opposition to parts of this plan change, and that's what we've done in other private plan change requests as well. So you can show your concern in several ways.
I won't labour the point now, but again, I thank you for this frank advice, because I think that as governors, we are being expected to act on the most recent information that we have.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mike Lee.
Yes, can I ask if this matter, and there seems to be that it has, but can you confirm it, that the substance of this private plan change was dealt with in the Auckland unitary plan process by the independent panel? Could you confirm that?
Yes, part of it was definitely included in the future urban zone as a result of a submission, and the panel made that, the IHP made that decision.
And I just as a supplementary, would the panel's decision regarding this matter be of assistance to the council in any future possible litigation?
I guess the relevance is that they rezoned it to future urban, and so that's basically a holding zone, and we have to go through that structure planning process, which the applicant has done themselves, to determine which is the best live zone for the land. So I suppose that the panel in its wisdom and with the material that was in front of it in 2015 or 16, made the call that that particular part that floods should be included in the future urban zone. I don't know, we will have more information. I guess we may have moved on since 2015 in terms of the information.
But just, can I just get this straight? So, future urban, but not present urban in the unitary plan, hence the need for a private plan change. Is that right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Ferry.
Thanks. We've heard a little bit about this plan change from Ōrākei. I'm not familiar with that for my time. What year was that? Anyone?
Not last term, the term before.
Okay, so in the third term. Yeah, third term. Okay, so when we...
Sorry, I didn't mean to answer your question.
No, that's fine. I was happy for anyone to answer. So when we ask the question, what's changed between now and then, I guess the answer is a lot of things. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's just what I wanted some clarity on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Leone.
Kia ora. Thank you very much for the presentation and the advice given. I just also wanted to clarify a few things, and in terms of the timeframes and probably some legal advice. So given the fact that we've got a lot going on with central government and reviewing all the issues that we've experienced with the floods, have we exhausted all avenues to consider extending the timeframe for this, or is this, has that already been exhausted to the maximum amount of time?
Through the Chair, I understand that based on the statutory timeframes for consideration of a private plan change, we have already doubled the timeframe, and we're actually over time. So the councillors will need to make a decision on this private plan change request today.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Peter. You're doing a very good job of expressing the kind of fine balance that exists in this one. But I've got a very pragmatic question. In my ward, we've been dealing with a number of applications similar to this in the respect that it's on, future urban zone land. It has various shortcomings with it in terms of, transport, water, etc. In that instance, these applicants have just avoided this and gone straight to the COVID-19 fast-track legislation and, have avoided this sort of scrutiny. I guess from a very pragmatic kind of viewpoint, why wouldn't this applicant be doing the same thing? And I know that as far as the fast-track legislation goes, it finishes in July, I think it is. And would that option still be available to them to do that if this was, rejected today? So a couple of questions there.
Sorry.
Councillor Watson, through the chair. It would be open to the applicant to apply for a fast-track resource consent. You can't get a fast-track plan change. And the nature of this plan change is quite different to a resource consent. You would rarely see a resource consent for 1,500 to 1,800 dwellings in one hit. This is a proposed stage development over many years, probably over a decade or more. So it's quite different to a resource consent. So we have had situations where applicants have been progressing private plan changes in Drury, for example, and also looking to obtain a fast-track resource consent for a portion of the land. So that may be an option that the applicant could explore for a portion, but I think this plan change is quite different to a resource consent, much larger scale, longer term, involving land development as well as buildings over the longer term.
Thank you. And what looks like the last question, Councillor Henderson.
Thanks, just jumping in here. Because I think there'd be many on this committee that are kind of concerned about the Orake case and whether it sets a precedent. Can I just ask, were the fact scenarios analogous at all, and will the court judge things on their facts rather than on base precedent?
Through the chair, I don't think this is analogous with the Oraki Point trustees' decision, in that the staff report to council on that particular private plan change identified no grounds of rejection available, in which case the council didn't have the ability to reject the private plan change, but did so in any case. And yeah.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Councillor Newman online.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry I can't be there this morning, and unfortunately connection dropped out a little bit earlier on, but in supporting this, can I ask the officers with respect to B Roman numeral 1A, have commissioners or the court ever, to the best of your knowledge, rejected a plan change application on the basis that the application proposed a development outcome that went ahead of a sequence preferred by council, whether it be the future urban land supply strategy or any of its predecessors? Has the court or commissioners rejected an application that was considered in a contested hearing on that or similar grounds?
Chair, I can answer that. Councillor Newman, the short answer is no. Yeah, we have several cases where that's been raised in hearings, but commissioners have approved a number of private plan changes that are ahead of the timing in the Falls. Nothing has yet gone to the Environment Court that I'm aware of. Yeah.
And the reason for that is that each application, whether or not council regards it as an appropriate timing or out of sequence, is judged by commissioners or courts based on the merits of the application over and above a matter of when the council would like the council would like the development to be sequenced to take place. Is that correct?
The Falls is a matter that commissioners can and should have regard to, but as you pointed out, Councillor Newman, they look at the detailed evidence and the facts of the particular case, private plan change or resource consent at the time. I've just noticed there may be a correction from Karina in terms of my previous statement around no decisions, but as far as I'm aware, I can't think of any.
Through the chair, the only one that springs to mind is Plan Change 61, where independent commissioners declined that particular private plan change. As I understand it, it was out of sequence and there were issues in relation to transport and infrastructure. Those issues were subsequently addressed through an Environment Court process, but that was one where independent commissioners did actually decline that private plan change.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So we might, we'll get the staff to move back. We will have a 5-minute break, bathroom, cup of tea break. So come back just at 12:01. There may be people who want to speak to it.
put forward by the Mayor and seconded by the Chair. I'm making a plea to the rest of the councillors around the table to support my position on that. I am the councillor for that ward, and that's why I appreciate the opportunity to speak to it, Mr. Chair. I know the area intimately, and I know the perhaps the implications of our decisions today on that community. My support, Mr. Chair, isn't an indictment in any way on the advice that has been given in the paper by the staff. I think the staff have done what they can do and are bound to do, and I'd use the term somewhat, perhaps their hands might be tied in many ways to express any other opinion than what they have. So they've done a professional job there. So supporting this is no indictment on our staff. Likewise, in terms of the developers that are putting this forward, you know, they are large professional organisations with very good reputations, and so supporting this is certainly no criticism of those organisations. However, is listening with an open mind to the questions that have been asked, considering all that and making a valued judgment, it is, in my opinion, the right thing to do to reject the application. That would be primarily at my forefront of my thinking there, Chair, is around the stormwater and transport implications that we did touch on quite significantly, both in the paper and in the question session, which just really cemented my position to support this. There is flooding already identified on a section of that property. You know, it might be around 10% that might be indicated, and it may be able to be mitigated, but we do have areas of Auckland that weren't on floodplains at all and went right under. So we can just, it's my opinion that that flooding would be very difficult to mitigate, and it doesn't make common sense to me to build intense, and this proposal is for intense housing development on or near floodplains as we've experienced as a city. It just is not wise to do. Furthermore, not all councillors will be or have any familiarity potentially about the State Highway 16 situation, and in terms of the, I actually consider it to be the most congested road in all of Auckland, and there aren't any, in my mind, there's no immediate relief to that traffic congestion along State Highway 16. This development would be directly feeding into that congestion by directing traffic, or a large portion of the traffic could go the Albany way, but most, I suspect, commuters would be going on to State Highway 16. You know, I know councillors might not be familiar with the area, but it is shocking. There is no significant relief planned for that area, in my mind, for many years until the actual new bypass is built right around the commute township that is unfunded and, you know, just at the notice requirement stages as we speak. So I don't want to do that to my community and support this private plan change and just compound that problem. So in closing, councillors, I just ask you to consider to make your own decision, but, you know, as the ward councillor, I would urge you to support the recommendation before you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. And Councillor Sayers, I will support you on this. There's some good reasons set out why we should be rejecting this plan change. And normally our process is to accept, and then we'll put in a submission and we will identify the things that constrain us, which is mostly the infrastructure. I think looking at B, which is about the flooding in that area, Aucklanders are looking to us to apply a stronger leadership to not build in floodprone areas. Aucklanders are saying to us, why do you keep allowing these to go through? And there is no understanding of the technicalities for a lot of our people in Auckland, but here we have an opportunity to test this because we do have grounds as listed to get a decision by the Environment Court, but we must show Aucklanders that we are listening to them, that we hear that they want us to no longer build in areas that are going to flood. And that is why I will be supporting that, and for the reasons that Councillor Sayers has given, the additional stress on your community when the infrastructure is not there. This is a consistent challenge for us as a council. Usually we can work our way through negotiations with our developers, and the developers are very excellent developers and have provided some incredible houses out in my area in Waiata Shores, and I enjoy a good relationship out there with Fletchers. But in the context of where we are now as a city, in the context of our climate and the challenges that we face in funding the infrastructure, I think we just need to say, let's just get a decision. Let's just hi-ho here and put a, I don't know if it's a line in the sand, but it is about saying we've really got to try and address some of these issues and get some decisions for us to go forward. So thank you. I'll support you, Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. I just need to check, as it looks like the communication keeps dropping in and out. Councillor Philippine and Councillor Newman, are you still hearing us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep, same here.
Cool, thank you. It just was showing up on our screen that it was not connected. There are, just checking there are no more speakers. I'll finish up if there are, Councillor Walker, last speaker.
Sure, so I'll certainly be supporting this. The general concern that I've got is that if we've got flooding already occurring in part of the property, it doesn't take too much imagination to realise that given that our flood modelling, our catchment modelling is already out of date, and in this instance we're talking about a significant catchment. I mean, it's 8,000 odd hectares, and our climate related data in the unitary plan is already well out of date as well. On my part, I operate in rather a prudent and conservative fashion, and I certainly also agree with the comments that Councillor Sayers has made around the transport issues in this area. You know, they are severe. So I'll be taking a prudent position around this, and I think we have to give a lead and give a lead to our officers. I would make the comment that there is an appendice that goes to flooding and the like, but that's not amongst the attachments. The officers tell me the file is too big, so I have endeavoured to do more diligence, but that information at this point is not available to me.
Kia ora, Councillor, thank you. And Councillor Philippine, apologies, I remember you now had reserved a right to speak. You are now able to speak.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Chair. Chair, I will be calling a division. I know at this stage I'll most probably be the only person who will not be supporting the new recommendations, Chair, and I'm just going to outline to everybody why I will not be supporting the recommendations, Chair, that you and His Worship the Mayor have put in. And I think one of the key things for me is that listening to the staff in regards to this and having a look at whether the riverhead was, again, the sections I pointed out was not frivolous. not vexatious. Also, I know that this particular development will not go ahead for at least 10 years. And if I recall, our staff said that they had already spoken with the developer, and the eight hectares that they were talking about around the flooding, the prone to flooding, they were going to have a look at that particular issue. They have the time to do that, Chair, and also the members of this committee. The other issues as well, from my perspective anyway, around not supporting the recommendation is on the next steps, and that's 121. It must be notified within 4 months of its acceptance. The other issue is iwi authorities and other directly affected parties will be directly notified. The views and preferences of the Rodney Local Board will be sought after submissions close for inclusion in the Section 42A hearing report. When I saw the recommendations, Chair, that yourself and His Worship put up, I looked at, there's at least one reason, hence the question about what that particular reason is. And then Councillor Newman asked some pertinent questions from my perspective, and that was in regards to whether there's been any hearings from either the courts or commissioners that have rejected plan change based on it not corresponding with any of our policies or reports. So, Chair, for me, I think it's looking at number 6 as well. And it is recommended that the private plan change requests accept under clause 25(2)(b) Schedule 1 of the Resource Management and publicly notified, so that a detailed assessment of the merits of the plan change can be undertaken and a decision made by independent hearing commissioners. What we've just done, and I know it'll go through with what's been up there, but what we've done is circumvented that. We're shutting them out. And my last comment, Chair, and the committee is that 10 years, it's 10 years away. They understand the realities, and I'm talking about the developers. They understand the realities around the issues we faced in Auckland. So look, I will not be supporting it, and I will be calling for division. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor. And the last speaker, just making sure, I will be supporting, obviously this this rejection, as the councillor for the ward area has spoke to me and others a lot of times about the transport issues, Riverhead, Kumu, Huapai, and those areas already. We have had a lot of correspondence about the flooding and the issues before January 27th in the Riverhead and Kumu and the Northwest more generally, and the concerns from community and other elected members around this as well. I guess we are looking for the narrow window of grounds to reject. Yes, that is correct, and we know that there will be court action, but it is outside of our plans. The next item on this agenda is around our future development strategy and how we look at where development is happening. The main concern, not only in the Northwest but around Auckland, is always that we are building far before the infrastructure can catch up, and that is not a good outcome for our community. And now we are having to deal with the decisions. We are looking right across all our plans and policies right now due to the floods on where we should be building and where we shouldn't be building, and this will be tested through this process as well. So I will put this to a division. Councillor Filipaina has put this to a division, and Sandra will call that out. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hills. Members are voting for the motion which was on your screen. Councillor Hills.
Yes.
Member Ashby. Thank you. Councillor Baker. Councillor Bartley.
For.
Deputy Chair Dalton.
For.
Councillor Ferry.
For.
Councillor Filipaina.
Against.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Councillor Fuli.
Aye, for.
Member Hanare. Councillor Henderson.
Yes.
Councillor Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Leone.
For.
Councillor Newman.
For in part, I wish to have my vote recorded against B, Roman numeral 1A. Other than that, yes, and for.
Thank you. Councillor Sayers.
For.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Turner. Councillor Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
For.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Thank you. That's carried.
That was carried
18 to 2.
18 to
With
2.
one abstention.
With one abstention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. Now we'll move to